did something last night. It was monumental. I finished The Sopranos. All 6 seasons of The Sopranos. That has dominated my life over the last couple of months. Starting The Sopranos during the NBA season was a choice, but given how the Grizzlies season spiraled, it was a nice escape to be used throughout the season, and escapism is a big theme of The Sopranos. I thought it was excellent. I will genuinely miss sitting down and having The Sopranos to watch. I fully became a part of that world. Their family was thankfully not my family, but you get attached to these characters. The Sopranos did the role of evil bad dude is the protagonist of the show so well. It set the stage for a character like Walter White in Breaking Bad. It sets a stage for a Don Draper of Mad Men. We see it all the time where you are rooting for people who are doing really horrific things. And by the time you get to the last scene in Made in America, the final iconic scene where it's Tony Soprano going out to dinner with his family and his daughter, Meadow, is struggling to parallel park his car, and his son is there late, and they're ordering onion rings, and they say that they're the best onion rings in Jersey, but they look like really nasty onion rings. And Journey's Don't Stop Believing is playing in the background. And you're so tense because you know or you feel what's going to happen, and then it just goes to black. And the creator has said that, spoiler, it indicated that Tony got shot and died in that moment. It was a very Mandela effect thing for me because I watched this particular episode of The Sopranos in film school at USC from a screenwriting standpoint, and I thought that you saw Tony get shot. My brain, it's like how Berenstein Bears is spelled differently. My brain saw Tony get shot and die, and that's how it ends. That's not the case, obviously. The whole point is that it just goes to black, but you have so many discussions that that is what happened. It's interesting for me watching it from the standpoint of the entire series. If I didn't know, if I hadn't listened to an interview with the writer and director, I would have actually taken the other side and said, I don't think he did die. I think the show represented so many times where Tony Soprano cheated death. Why not one more? Why not in this instance where it seemed like he evaded all of the boogeymen coming from him one final time? And he was just sitting there having dinner with his family, because it doesn't always come for everybody. And I kind of thought it was interesting how, and it's not just assumed, like the creator has said, this is what happened. But I would have gone the other direction.
I remember reading The Giver in like the 6th or 7th grade. And for those of you who don't know, the Giver ends that way, where instead of a fade to black, it is, hey, he's looking out in the freezing cold with this baby with him. He's looking out and he sees the lights of another city. And so he's going to be saved. And the question was posed to us, hey, do you think he was important to memory? Do you think that he actually lived, or that he's dying and just wants to remember something pleasant? I was like, oh, no. No, he's living. And I think that shows something about what you are as an individual, which side of that you take. It makes sense. I remember people being outraged by it, but it makes sense that this story with him as a protagonist and everything centered around him, when his time comes and he's gone, he's dead, he dies, it makes sense for there to be no, because you're not telling that story from anybody else's perspective. You're not telling it from anybody else's point of view. And that's how death happens. It's that. You're here and then you're not. And your consciousness leaves with you. And so you don't get to linger about and see how everybody else sort of figures life out without you. And a show that is The Sopranos, hadn't watched it, outside looking in, and a show that is The Sopranos with everything centered around Tony Soprano, it would make sense for everything to just shut down as soon as he dies, because nobody else really matters the same way that he does.
Right. And we got a multi-episode arc where he was in the limbo of dying after being shot. So you saw how family members reacted. You saw how his friends, how his fellow mafia members, how the inner workings of the mafia worked. And I do love the fade to black from a sense of its interpretation too, which is the whole point of all of this. Like, this is a show about money and death and family and nurture versus nature and sociopaths. And are sociopaths 100% bad, or can you find glistenings of good and just humanity within everyone. And some would argue no, and some would argue yes. And you have a character in Tony Soprano who is responsible for so much death and destruction, and his relations to that death and destruction and how he shows emotions. I just thought it was really interesting. I thought the female characters on the show were written in such an interesting way, and I think maybe the writer has some issues with women that he worked through in those characters. But particularly Carmela Soprano. And in the finale, you see another head of, one of the crime families. He's executed, and his wife is there. And it's a reminder of, like, no one is spared. His wife is just sitting in the car. His babies are in the back, and he's just shot at a gas station after filling up the tank. And from a standpoint of it, like, alluding to the wives can look away so much. Like, they know what they've signed up for. They have made their own deal with the devil, in a sense of, my husband does really awful things, but I get this really nice house. I get really nice jewelry. I have the opportunity to live whatever privileged life I desire because of the carnage that my husband does business. Yeah, sure, he works in the trash industry, but they know that they don't. And so why should they be shielded? And so the thought that Tony dies at that dinner table surrounded by his wife, his daughter, and his son, they can't be shielded from it. Whatever blinders they put up along the way, they get zapped out. And I think that's, like, one of the most interesting theories, or one of the most interesting, like, theses of the whole thing, and the therapy angle of it, and how you delve into the human psyche. And
how is the therapist doing? Is it the same therapist?
Dr.
The whole
Melfi,
time?
yeah.
Okay.
She drops him as a client.
When? What season?
At the last two episodes.
Last two episodes.
So there was one of her colleagues shared, she ends up at a dinner with a bunch of therapists where they're talking about how there was a study on sociopaths and how they can use therapy to become an even better version of a sociopath. Like, they know how to fake emotions so well, and they essentially work on the therapist so that they can perfect how they are out in the real world. And so I think there was finally enough of a moral quarry for this therapist who, nothing changed. It was just her peers showing a paper that essentially said, hey, what you're doing might be worsening the situation instead of bettering it. I think there was a level of hubris with her. And I think there's this cool factor, right? Like, I'm Tony Soprano's therapist. And some people knew, which is always not attorney-client privilege, but like therapist-client privilege. But if you were a therapist and a mobster came to you and was like, will you be my therapist? What would you as a therapist feel is your, like, moral or your ethic line where you would eventually have to report something to the police? Like, he doesn't directly say, yo, I went out and killed someone today. But there are many allusions to the people who fell along the way.
I think that's an interesting question for me, because I'm not tied to a job. I'm not a insert job here. I'm a CJ, and I'm a person. And so eventually I would think, first off, I don't think I'd take that type of client on, because, like, no, I have no duty to you. I'm not going to do that. But then once we start talking, it is, holy cow, this person is terrible. Yeah, I'm snitching. I'm tattletelling. Like, I can't have this be happening, and I know about it because now I'm implicated. And you talked about the blinders no longer being able to go up. Yo, these people aren't going to just, and I'm sure in the show they do this, they don't just go after family. They go after friends. They go after known associates. They go after anybody
strangers,
who knows,
accidents.
who they think knows anything about this person.
Yeah.
Right? So I don't want to get caught up in that. So yeah, I'm tattletelling. Put me in witness protection. I'm snitching. That's how I roll.
Yeah, and the witness, like, people who flip is such an interesting story. I did think, especially in the later seasons, because it was post 9/11, there were interesting themes on terrorism and, like, terrorism abroad, which was the entirety of our lives in the early 2000s following 9/11. But then, like, you have terrorists in your backyard. Like, what separates a terrorist from a mafia member who is terrorizing a community and doing a bunch of illegal stuff and killing a bunch of people in cold blood? Anyway, great show. Not my favorite show of all time. Not my favorite show. Top three.
Listen.
I don't feel the need to do that. I think there can be I think we've been blessed with so many incredible television series. And so I know some people feel a very certain kind of way about their favorite TV show, but it reminded me, as I was watching it, how much I loved Mad Men.
The Jessica Benson Show with CJ Hart, live every weekday at 8 a.m.